It's really hard to describe to you what it feels like to look out and see my fellow actors.
Alda brought joy to our lives for 11 years as Hawkeye Pierce. But behind closed doors, he buried anguish that would plague him for years to come. He is now coming clean about the events on MASH. His co-star who left due to him, the episode that caused the cast to fall out, and the terrible tale that was too bleak to air on television. Here is the MASH tale that the American public was unaware of. Alda came into this world in the Big Apple on January 28, 1936. Alfonso Joseph D. Abruzzo was his full name. Robert Alda was a musician and actor who raised him. A former beauty pageant winner, Joan Brown was his mother. Alan has always had some connection to the entertainment industry. Because his father was a vaudeville and burlesque performer, Alan spent a lot of time as a kid in the wings. He loved to see performers hone their skills, whether it was dancing, comedy, or music. He was engulfed in the kinetic intensity of live performances. It was a thrilling and unexpected world. Life was full of ups and downs since his father had to travel often for work. At the age of 7, Alan's childhood took a dark turn. It was in 1943 when he got polio, a condition that caused permanent impairments to a large number of youngsters. The sole option for therapy was excruciatingly painful. To aid with muscle recovery, he had to wrap his limbs in heated wool blankets hourly. Because they were strapped on cash, his parents administered all of his therapies themselves. Even while he was in excruciating agony, his parents labored non-stop to alleviate it. There was a period when he was almost immobile. There was a time when he could only move his left arm. He was profoundly affected by the event. The weight of his parents' love washed over him as he witnessed their sacrifice. Even in the face of seeming despair, he mastered the art of pushing through suffering. He carried such resiliency into old age. An additional dimension to his youth was the burden of his mother's problems. Joan Brown fought mental health challenges while remaining composed and graceful. Their home was often tense because of her emotions. Alan learned to read people's emotions and adapt while he was growing up. A talent that would influence his acting career, he grew adept at reading people. He made a transition that represented his autonomy while also strengthening his ties to his loved ones when he resolved to become an entertainer. Using the initials of both his parents' last names, Brown and Alfonso, he came up with his own name. Alfonso d'Abruzzo changed his name to Alan Alda in such way. The name was short and easy to recall, and it had a hint of his parents' legacy. He wasn't just concerned with his studies when he enrolled at New York's Fordham University. Upon joining WFUV, the university's radio station, he dove headfirst into acting. He honed his skills in creating vivid characters with just his voice while working on radio plays there. Going to college wasn't all about playing sports. While still a student, Alda split his time between Paris for school and Rome for acting. He was exposed to several forms of theater while traveling. It enlightened him to the importance of narrative and the ways in which cultural factors influenced stage performances. He continued to refine his craft upon his return to the United States. After that, he moved on to Chicago's Second City and the Compass Players. He learned to rely on his gut and think quickly in these improv groups. One of the most valuable skills he would use throughout his career was the ability to live in the now, which he learned from them. Alda was able to work at the Cleveland Playhouse in the late 1950s thanks to a grant he received from the Ford Foundation. He was a versatile actor who appeared in several shows, such as Job, Heaven Come, Wednesday, Monique, and To Dorothy. He was able to hone his craft by sharing stages with more seasoned performers in these parts. Although performing was a major part of his early years, he had fought polio when he was a kid. When he was unwell at the tender age of 7, his parents used a therapy that included stretching and covering him in warm wool blankets. It hurt, but it got the job done. The lesson of perseverance he learned in that early struggle will serve him well throughout his life. With 1959's Only in America, he got his big break on Broadway. That was only the first step. He played Charlie Cacioppi in the 1961 film Purlie Victorious. After that, in 1964, he had a role in the romantic comedy Fair Game for Lovers, where he was able to showcase his charisma and comic timing. The audience paid close attention during this presentation. Simultaneously, he began making appearances on television. He became a part of the satirical news show that was The Week That Was, which aired from 1964 to 1965. He was able to hone his comic chops and reach a wider audience as a result. His daring performance in The Owl and the Pussycat was also that year. Alongside Diana Sands, he portrayed Felix the Owl. Not only did the play gain fame for its comedic elements, but for something far more significant as well. On stage, Alda and Sands, who happened to be black, exchanged a kiss. That was unprecedented back then, and it caused quite a stir. Hate mail was even sent to them. Regardless matter the situation, Alda always rose to the task. Paper Lion, his first feature picture, was released in 1968. He portrayed writer George Plimpton, who gets an intimate look at professional football by signing up with the Detroit Lions. Playing the part allowed Alda to blend comedic and dramatic elements, and he was equally at home beside real-life football stars like Joe Schmidt and Alex Karras. He starred with Marlo Thomas in Jenny, a more serious film, 2 years after that. A romance between a young guy and a pregnant woman was the subject of the film. Despite its diminutive size, the picture demonstrated his ability to skillfully navigate serious and comedic genres. Despite all of her achievements, Alda had a hard time settling down in the 60s and 70s. In an effort to make ends meet, he hopped from minor TV parts to another. Among his appearances on game shows was What's My Line? And I'll tell you why. That was the week that he got guest roles on Phil Silver's show. The problem was that he never broke through in any of these roles. Many in the business were aware of his abilities. Even yet, he still hadn't scored the job that would catapult him to stardom. It was at that moment, though, when everything shifted. Captain Benjamin Franklin Hawkeye Pierce, played by Alan Alda, catapulted him to stardom on MASH. A mobile army hospital was the setting for this 1972 to 1983 series, which chronicled the experiences of the medical staff serving the Korean War. Battles weren't the focus of the war show, though. It dealt with individuals attempting to stay alive in an intolerable setting. The absurdity of their situation served as a shield for their sense of humor. That was best exemplified by Hawkeye. He had exceptional surgical skills. On the other hand, he was never one to respect authority. He played practical jokes, questioned rules that didn't make sense, and cracked jokes. Still, he cared profoundly beneath it all. Though he was powerless to halt hostilities, he might spare lives. Hawkeye was a name that originated with the last of the Mohican people. The protagonist in the narrative shown remarkable courage and ingenuity. Certainly, Alda's Hawkeye in MASH was worthy of the moniker. Instead of using firearms, he battled with scalpels and words. To keep himself and his pals from going crazy, he defended his patients, battled with superiors, and did whatever else was necessary. His listeners were inspired to laugh by his humor, yet they felt the weight of war by his rage and grief. Thanks to Alda's turn, Hawkeye became the showstopper. The crowd couldn't get enough, even if several of his other actors believed the spotlight was shining too brightly on him. One of the most watched television series of all time was MASH. It made a message, it wasn't only entertaining. Despite taking place in Korea, the show's message was crystal clear that the Vietnam War was still ongoing when it aired. Combat was brutal. It killed individuals in ways they couldn't have imagined. With each episode, Alda gained more and more agency over the show's direction. He did more than perform, he also wrote and directed. Finally, in Goodbye, Farewell, and Amen, he accomplished his greatest feat. He not only directed it but also co-wrote it, which resulted in a memorable finale. Millions of people saw the last scenes of MASH on February 28, 1983. Those figures were unprecedented. A total of 121 million people were able to watch, with over 105 million tuning in live. For its time, it held the record for most viewers of any television program ever. A farewell wasn't the only purpose of the conclusion. It was a contemplation of the characters' experiences. It conveyed their weariness, their sorrow, and their frantic efforts to maintain their humanity. There were some humorous parts. Some of them were devastating. Even though the battle had ended, nobody was spared. Every moment had weight because Alda made sure of it. Farewells were always poignant. No scripted program for almost 30 years could compete with its audience. Even after the series finale aired, Alda continued to have an impact on MASH. The show's identity was shaped in part by him. He ensured that it provoked thought rather than only laughter. There was more to war than tactics and cavalry. Medical professionals were attempting to rescue patients. People who were never asked for it were the main characters. The greatest method to communicate those stories, in Alda's opinion, was with comedy. Laughter has the power to alleviate the intolerable. The show, however, made sure that viewers never lost sight of the seriousness of the situation. Secret tensions rose in tandem with Alda's influence on MASH. The show's balance had turned too heavily toward Hawkeye, according to several cast members. His impact on the play was substantial, and his presence was impossible to ignore. The gregarious surgeon and Hawkeye Pierce confidant trapper John McIntyre was portrayed by Wayne Rogers. There was supposed to be no hierarchy between Trapper and Hawkeye when MASH first started. Their bond served as the show's emotional core. And that was what Rogers thought his post would represent. However, Alan Alda's character became more prominent as the series progressed. Not only was he an actor, but he was also a writer and director. The scales turned as his influence continued to rise. To Rogers, it seemed like Trapper was moving from co-lead to sidekick. His irritation level rose. He was starting to lose touch with the persona he had agreed to portray. There were no big disagreements between him and Alda, but he found it difficult to remain due to the show's artistic approach. He opted to go after 3 seasons. His departure was sudden. There was no appropriate send-off for Trapper on the episode. He appeared one moment and vanished the next. No time was given for supporters to grieve or reflect on his passing. Then Rogers proceeded. Another opportunity to portray Trapper came in 1979 with Trapper John, M.D. He was clearly in the lead this time. Meanwhile, Mike Farrell's character, B.J. Honeycutt, made his debut on MASH. He provided Hawkeye with a new type of partner, one that was gentler and more grounded. Despite having its main actors shuffled about, the sitcom kept evolving. Alda and Farrell got into an imaginative argument many years down the road. In the 7th season, in an episode titled Preventative Medicine, it occurred. In this narrative, Hawkeye's journey begins with a life-altering decision. Not because the commander is ill, but because he can save more men from dying, he wants to remove his appendix. BJ is saying no to being involved. According to him, it's completely unethical. The two sides didn't only argue on paper. It held true. According to Farrell, BJ would never back such a move. Hawkeye would, Alda thought. The episode benefited from their discussion. Viewers were left with a challenging question rather than a straightforward right or wrong by the narrative. Is there ever a time when acting unethically is necessary to avert harm? The operation is carried out by Hawkeye. Yet rather than experiencing a sense of heroism, it haunts him. Changes had already taken place by the time MASH's 1983 series finale aired. It had beyond the realm of humor. There was now a far more profound element to it. When it comes to television viewing records, few episodes can compare to Goodbye, Farewell, and Amen, the series finale. In the middle of it all comes Hawkeye's breakdown. Stories of PTSD experienced by Korean War veterans provided as inspiration for this plot. The conclusion was co-written and directed by Alda, who aimed to demonstrate the enduring impact of war. Even though he had always been the witty, sharp-tongued physician, Hawkeye was starting to crumble. The depth of his suffering was exposed as a long-forgotten recollection reappeared. There was a lack of understanding about PTSD during that period. Many war heroes endured their pain in quiet. The matter was brought to light by MASH. Alan Alda continued to work tirelessly after MASH finished in 1983. He was ready for a change after more than a decade as Hawkeye Pierce. Even when he took on directing jobs, he continued to play characters that tested him in new ways. In 1981, he directed The 4 Seasons, one of his early big features. Not only was he the director, but he also authored and performed in the film. In the film, we saw the evolution of 3 couples' friendships and marriages as they embarked on an annual holiday together. It wasn't only a comedic piece. It was rich with genuine moments, honesty, and depth. Both reviewers and audiences were impressed with Alda's storytelling skills. He clearly has skills beyond acting. He kept taking on playing parts that showcased his versatility even as he established himself as a filmmaker. Crimes and Misdemeanors, directed by Woody Allen and released in 1989, had one of his most iconic performances. He was charming and unpleasant as the self-absorbed TV producer Lester. Nothing he had done prior to this position was like that. His performance was a masterful blend of haughtiness and comedy. The National Board of Review and the New York Film Critics Circle both presented him with honors for his performance. His ability to deftly transition between dramatic and comedic roles was further demonstrated. He went from being just a TV actor to something much more with the 4 seasons of Crimes and Misdemeanors. He had the ability to sculpt projects in front of and behind the camera because of his storytelling talents. His career reached yet another pinnacle over 10 years later. The Aviator, directed by Martin Scorsese and released in 2004, starred him as Senator Owen Brewster. He was pitted against Leonardo DiCaprio's Howard Hughes in a dramatic political position. With 11 nominations and 5 wins, the picture was a smashing success at the Oscars. Alda was the standout performer. He succeeded in making Brewster complex, ambitious, and cunning rather than a stereotypical evil. A Best Supporting Actor Oscar nomination came his way for his performance. It demonstrated that his acting chops were still sharp after all these years. Science was another one of Alda's many interests outside of acting and directing. The Public Broadcasting Service, PBS, program Scientific American Frontiers, which covers cutting-edge medical and scientific research, had him as its anchor in 1993. However, he was more than just a host. He engaged in meaningful dialogue with scientists, participated in experiments, and had genuine questions. Viewers were able to relate to the show because of his talent at simplifying complex subjects. In one episode, he tried out a VR prototype car. He was ill to his stomach after the ordeal. However, they decided to keep it on the show instead of removing it. Such moments added an enjoyable and captivating element to the presentation. Throughout its 15 seasons, Scientific American Frontiers encouraged a new generation of scientists to follow in their footsteps. Even after becoming scientists, some of them had previously featured on the show in their youth. Even after the series concluded in 2005, Alda's devotion persisted. His 2009 gift to Stony Brook University was the Alan Alda Center for Communicating Science. At this facility, scientists learn to articulate their findings in ways that the general public may understand and enjoy. The scientific method, in Alda's view, should be accessible to all people. His contributions to the event and the center demonstrated that storytelling can take place in many forms outside cinema and television. It has the potential to alter people's worldviews. It seemed fated that Alan Alda and Arlene Weiss would cross paths. They attended a dinner party in 1956 at the home of a mutual acquaintance. Sometime during the evening, a rum cake that was baked from scratch fell off the counter and ended up on the kitchen floor. Unlike the majority of the visitors, Alan and Arlene were unfazed. Neither of them hesitated before biting in. It was that brief, unplanned encounter that united them. For years, Alan has made light of the fact that they were inseparable after devouring that cake. Their wedding day was March 15, 1957, a full year after they were engaged. They understood each other well, laughed a lot, and trusted one another from the beginning of their relationship. The photographer and writer Arlene was Alan's constant companion. As he went through the ups and downs of Hollywood, she was there to encourage him and make sure their house was safe and secure. Many times, Alan says that she is the one who keeps him grounded. She remained discreet to safeguard their personal lives while his career soared. There was more to their marriage than just public displays of affection. What really mattered were the little things that brought them closer. They were always fun to be around since they had similar ideals and a sense of humor. They dealt with Alan's Parkinson's diagnosis the same way they had dealt with everything else, together. Alan and Arlene made a decision when Alan's career took off. A regular life, free from the demands of Hollywood, was what they wanted for their family. With that aim in mind, they brought up 3 daughters, Beatrice, Elizabeth, and Eve. Even though Alan had a famous acting career, he was just dad at home. He never let his hectic schedule prevent him from being there for significant occasions. When it came to maintaining stability at home, Arlene was important. She made it possible for their girls to grow up in an environment free from the pressures of celebrity. Laughter, tales, and a return to normalcy pervaded family time. According to Alan, his daughters kept him modest. His acting roles became the target of their taunting, making sure he maintained a lighthearted attitude. Their girls eventually struck off on their own. They remained close to their parents even as they established jobs and children. Something unusual had been accomplished by the Aldas. They managed to keep their family life together despite the crazy Hollywood industry. Alan became aware of subtle physical changes in 2015. In his sleep, he began to play out dreams and his thumb shook ever so slightly. A diagnosis of Parkinson's disease was given to him when he visited the doctor. The news was not immediately shared by him. He required some time to contemplate the implications for his future. He chose to go public in 2018, 3 years after that. Because he preferred to inform the world in his own way, he made his diagnosis public on CBS This Morning. Helping other people was even more important to him. He refused to let Parkinson's slow him down and instead actively worked to manage it. To maintain his physical strength, Alan concentrated on mobility. As part of his regimen, he began boxing, played tennis singles, and even marched to music. He was honest about his struggles in the hopes that it might inspire others. His point was quite obvious. Diagnosis is not the end of life. There is a plenty of enjoyment and activities to be had. Alan Alda's performance as MASH's Captain Benjamin Hawkeye Pierce was a watershed moment in his career. Alda has been clean about how portraying Hawkeye made him face his worst anxieties, particularly those related to mortality. The snark and quick mind of the character weren't just quirks. As a defense mechanism against the atrocities of war, they helped people cope. The trials that Hawkeye faced echoed many of Alda's own contemplations about life and death. In spite of his achievements, Alda has acknowledged that he has battled imposter syndrome during his professional life. He still felt inadequate on a regular basis, despite his 6 Emmy wins for MASH. He was terrified that others might see through his facade of greatness one day. He was driven to always push himself to his limits, embrace new challenges, and never settle because of his fear. A lifelong passion for narrative, boundless skill, and unwavering commitment that is Alan Alda's career. Because of his significant impact on television, he was honored with an induction into the Hall of Fame in 1994. He had a hand in writing and directing in addition to his acting career. Mainly recognized for his contributions to MASH. The show became famous for its unique blend of humor and serious subjects throughout its run from 1972 to 1983. It was the first of its kind to address morality, war, and the toll that fighting takes on civilians. War hero stereotypes were flipped on their heads by Alda's Hawkeye Pierce. Aside from being quick with a joke, he had a strong mind and was rebellious. However, his true nature lay in his profound empathy. Hawkeye became one of the most iconic TV heroes because to his portrayal of the character. Alda continued to make waves in the business world even after MASH ended. He ventured into new film and TV roles, consistently giving his characters nuance. The Screen Actors Guild presented him with the Lifetime Achievement Award in 2019 in recognition of his immense contribution. Actors whose contributions to the trade have been as significant as their performances are presented with this prize. The Shrine Auditorium in Los Angeles was the site of the ceremony. His introduction by Tom Hanks set the tone for an impassioned, introspective, and wise speech. Empathy, Alda said, is key in acting and in life generally. Having just received a diagnosis of Parkinson's illness, his statements took on further significance. However, he refused to let that deter him. He persisted in performing, promoting science and communication, and highlighting the importance of narrative. His enthusiasm for performing was only matched by his passion for helping others. Fighting for Life was a 2005 St. Jude Children's Research Hospital special that he narrated. His heart belonged to this cause. Marlo Thomas, whose father, Danny, established a hospital, was a personal friend of his and his wife Arlene's. Thomas had spent many years collecting money for the cause. In the early 1970s, Alda and Marlo Thomas collaborated on a children's CD called Free to Be, You and Me. The album encouraged self-expression and equality. Alda was a vocal supporter of women's rights before it became trendy in Hollywood. In addition to being appointed to the International Women's Year Commission, he headed the men's campaign for the Equal Rights Amendment. There was more to these than meets the eye. Real change was being pushed by him through his influence. From a young age, Alda has had a gift with words. Among other things I've learnt, Never Have Your Dog Stuffed was his debut biography, which came out in 2005. Tales from the author's life, both humorous and tragic, filled the pages of the book. His experience filming scientific American frontiers in Chile stands out among the others. He was in grave danger because his intestines had been strangled. He amazed the physicians by grasping the medical terminology they used to describe the situation. He had picked them up while developing MASH. The novel, however, was about more than just dramatic scenes. A memory from my youth inspired the title. As a last resort, his father had his beloved dog stuffed when it passed away. The outcome was so disturbing that Alda drew a wise conclusion. No matter how bad it gets, you just have to let go sometimes. Things I Overheard While Talking to Myself, his second memoir, was released in 2008. It was a combination of anecdotes and wisdom gleaned from his many lectures over the years. If I Could Read Your Mind, Would I Be Facing This Expression? His third novel, came out in 2017. As a subject that Alda had delved into for a long time, communication was the main focus. Acting wasn't his only hobby. He yearned to learn the ins and outs of human connection, listening, and communication.